This is the number 5 cylinder on my 289 block, and I'm going to show you how I measure the rings in the bore. There's a couple different ways that people do this. As with anything on engine building, it seems to be a fair bit of controversy around just about everything. So I'm going to show you how I do it. My way is not the only way. My way may not even be the best way, but my way works. And so that's what I'm going to show you. One of the things I wanted to show you while I've got a pair of rings here, I've got a top ring, that's this one, and I've got a second ring, that's this one here. And sometimes it can be hard to tell which one is which. Especially if you've dumped them out of the bag and got them all over your workbench. There are a couple different ways to tell them apart. One way is by the bevel in the ring. The rings will come with a chart. The manufacturers provide a chart and they show you which ring has which type of groove. That'll tell you not only which ring it is, but which side is up. Mahle is kind enough to put their mark here on both of the rings in this set. This one's a little harder to see, but it's there. And so I know which side is up. What I need to know is which one is the oil control ring, or I'm sorry, which one is the top ring and which one's the second ring. Well, if you look at them on edge, one of them is a lot shinier than the other on the edge. And so the one that's shinier is the top ring. That's how you can tell the two apart. The top ring has a coating on the top and the bottom ring lands, but not on the side. The second ring doesn't have a coating at all. And so it gives the top ring a distinct look to it. The other thing there seems to be a fair amount of controversy over is how to put the ring in the cylinder in order to measure the gap. You need to do it in such a way that you don't damage the cylinder. The ring edges, if you're not careful, so for instance when I put it in here, if I'm not careful, I could scratch the lip of the cylinder with this ring as I try and force it in. There are a lot of different ways people do this. I've seen all kinds of stuff, but honestly the easiest way is to take the open end with the sharp edges and put that in first. Just push that in first and then rotate the ring. No danger, no problem. And so I'm actually going to rotate this a little bit, so the gap is over here where my finger is. That way you'll be able to see it on the camera. Okay, and so the gap is over here. Now, on to the next internet controversy. The manufacturer wants us to have this ring 1 inch down from the top of the cylinder deck in order to measure the gap. How do you get it 1 inch down? Any way you can is the short answer. You could take a ruler and mark it at 1 inch and use a ruler to push it down all the way around. Nothing wrong with that. You take an old piston, turn it upside down, and use the old piston to push it down in the cylinder bore. Nothing wrong with that either. As a matter of fact, if you take an old piston, remove the top and the second rings, but leave the oil control ring in place, when you put the piston in upside down, the oil control ring will stop the piston at the deck, and you know you'll get a straight, even height all the way around. That's a free way to do it. I happen to own a tool. This is my tool. It's got it's got 3 adjustable legs on it, so you can use it in a whole bunch of different bores. And these legs are all 3 1 inch. So I've got it adjusted for my 289, which is a 4 inch bore, 30 over. It fits in there really nicely, and I can just use this to push it down and sometimes I'll just give it a rotate to make sure that it's seated nice and evenly. And there's my ring 1 inch down, and I'll just adjust it slightly to make sure that the ends are even with each other. Any way you do this is fine. All these methods work fine. The end game is you want the ring to be an inch down, and so that you can measure the gap. Now, the gap, the ideal gap, is not what you always find in the manufacturer's overhaul manual, or a Haynes manual, or a Chilton manual, or a Ford specialty book, or a Chevy book, or anything like that. The best source of information for determining the ring gap is the ring manufacturer's documents. In this case, I have Mahle pistons and Mahle rings, and Mahle provided a chart that said for a street strip application like this engine will be, then the correct ring gap is the bore times 0.0045 for the top ring, and the bore times 0.004 for the second ring. And what that comes out to, in my application, a 4-inch bore 30 over, is 18 thousandths gap ideal for the top ring, and 16 thousandths gap for the second ring. And so in order to measure that, all you have to do is take a feeler gauge and slide it into the gap. Now, it should go in relatively easy, but you should feel a slight drag to it when it goes in. You shouldn't have to force it in, but it also shouldn't fall in easily. One thing you can do to check to make sure that you're achieving the gap you want is you can take the next size up. So this is 19 thousandths, and 19 thousandths goes in, but not all the way in. And so 18 thousandths goes in and has a nice drag feel to it. And you see me adjusting it here because sometimes when you pull out with the feeler gauge, the one side or the other of the ring will move, and so you just need to line it back up again. And so that is my top ring. My second ring should have a smaller gap. It should be, according to Mahle and their formula, it should be at 16 thousandths. And so I've got my 16 thousandths feeler gauge here, and I'll go ahead and stick that in, and it goes in. I've got a nice light drag feel to it. It does feel like it might be a little bit loose though, so let me quickly get out my 17 thousandths, and 17 thousandths goes in, but it's tight. Yeah, it's got a nice drag feel to it though. Yeah, I think maybe I went about a thousandths too far when I filed these rings. Yeah, that's definitely a 17. I bet you if I get the 18 out, it will not go in. Here is 18, and nope, it'll start to, but it won't actually go in. So that one is at 17 thousandths. So ideally, using the math based on the manufacturer's formula, I'm looking for 18 thousandths gap for the top ring, 1 inch down from the top of the bore, and 16 thousandths for the second ring, again 1 inch down from the top of the bore. And I actually achieved through filing 18 on the top ring and 17 on the second ring, which is not bad. It's not perfect. I did get it perfect on several of them, but you know, 1,000th off is really not a big deal. If I was 2 or 3 thousandths off, that would be a little bit more of a concern. But 1,000th, 17 instead of 16, I'm satisfied with that. And so that is how I measure my ring gaps using a feeler gauge and a ring squaring tool in the bore.